So here's my environment. I've got Diagnostic Manager up and running and ready to go. And again, I'm assuming everyone can see my screen. I hope that's the case. It looks like it is the case on my side, so I'm just going to move forward. And William asks real quickly, what is required to be notified of the quick take session? We send out, I mean, if you go to our website, there is a section under our knowledge base, or I'm sorry, in our portal where you can sign up for them. And once you're signed up, you'll get emails when they're coming up. Well, I'm sure Cherie can point you to that information once the meeting's done. So anyway, moving on. So here's my DM console, and we're just going to start from the top here, and I'm going to look at these options. So we've installed, we've added a farm, we've got some metrics coming in, we've got some default actions happening, but really I want to take a top down and take a look at the installation and make sure everything's tip-top. And this will give us a better understanding of how the tool is doing what it's doing. So collection service options is our first node here. And again, right up here in this ribbon, options, collection service options. This is basically going to give me all the information about what that collection service is doing and at what frequency he's doing it. So the first thing we see in the farm and page monitoring schedule, we see that every 24 hours, this tool is refreshing the farm topology. That means going out there, relearning from that objects table in the config database we talked about in our last meeting, learning the servers and nodes that are involved in the farm, and refreshing that data in this leftmost tree view. So every 24 hours, we do that. And then every 1 hour, we check SharePoint Health Analyzer and configuration data. So collection service manages all these different metrics and different specific collection jobs, right? One of those jobs is to collect the farm topology. One of those jobs is to learn the configuration about Health Analyzer stuff. Another one of those jobs is to collect content summary data. And content summary, as we remember, is this section over here where we get a breakdown of all the content in our environment down to the document compositioning if we want to, right? So this crawls web apps, learns the content on those web apps, and then makes that visible in the console so that we can see basically scaling of our farm, right? Sizing and document scaling for our farm. We can see how much stuff is getting added over time, et cetera, et cetera. By default, the content summary collection schedule happens every 1 a.m. on every day of the week. This is admittedly a bit ambitious. So content summary is one of those, I mean, of all the collections in this tool, content summary could probably be best described as the most performance intensive. That's why we kind of schedule it separately during these quiet time periods. We set it on to go every day just because we want, whenever you first install the tool, maybe you haven't done any of this review of these configurations. After it's sat for a few days, you can at least get an idea how that content summary metric data looks in your console. But realistically, this is the kind of thing you could probably just run once a week. I mean, really it depends on what your needs are and how up-to-date you want your monitoring data to be. Only you can answer those questions. But for a guy like me who's got a very minimal farm, I'm just monitoring it at the basis level. Every Sunday, it works for me, right? So I want every week when I come in on Monday morning to see, hey, how has the content grown since last Sunday, essentially, right? Now, again, maybe you want every day, maybe you want every couple of days, maybe there's a few key points in the week you need to learn this information. It's totally up to you. The point is, this is the kind of job that you really want to manage, right? You really want to know, you really want to keep tabs on when that's running because, again, it is the most performance intensive. It is running a collection against all these different web apps. Of course, we can granularize that collection in the context menus, and I'll show you that a little bit later too, but this main job collects against everything. So there are some other options in here, in whether or not we include hidden lists in these summaries, whether we include document versions, things like that. And those are great to know, but the real option that's most important here is this threading option, right? So in the older versions of the tools, one thread ruled them all. There was one thread we used for this content summary collection, and it ran against everything. And it was really, I mean, it worked, but, it really suffered in environments where things weren't just completely dedicated to DM resources, right? So one thread, you could imagine it could really start to time out and maybe take longer than you might expect. So we've added some functionality to allow you to increase the threads based on your cores. So in the server that I'm working on, it's a measly dual core processor. So I've got the threading set by default to 2. By default, this value should mirror the number of cores you have on the server hosting the collection service. So if you've got a quad-core machine or an 8-core machine, you should see those numbers at 4 and 8 respectively. And that's going to really speed up the process for this content summary stuff. This is actually a new addition to the tool in the latest version, and we're really happy with the results so far. So hopefully any of you out there who have seen issues with content summary collection in the past, hopefully this new feature will be helpful in resolving some of those. And to answer Fred's question, I am using version 4.2.2861.0, which is the very latest release available on the Metalogix website. Came out just a couple weeks ago, in fact. I'm assuming that Fred is one of those people who may be seeing issues with content summary. So, where were we? Let's see. In addition, for the record, in addition to this threading option, we've also included ability to exclude web apps from the content summary collection, and also the ability to run content summary of a specific web app ad hoc, i.e., I can jump in here, and if I need to see the documents immediately for a specific web app, rather than run the entire job again, I can jump in here, right-click, and collect web application content data for just this one. Notice this disable web application will prevent us from getting that content summary collection information. This is probably specifically most relevant to like central admin. It's not very often that you'll need to see the document composition for central admin in my experience. So yeah, we've added the ability to disable that, and I'm going to go ahead and do that in my environment, in fact. Please forgive my environment. There's other things happening in the background right now that are probably making my stuff slow. Yep. That's great. Cool. So as you can see, I've now disabled the central admin web app. He will no longer be involved in my content summary collections that happen every night. If I need to get new information on a specific web app, I can right-click, run the collection, and it'll collect only content summary document sizing information for that specific web application, which is pretty cool if you compare it to how things used to be. In the old days, all you could ever do is run against everything, right? So yeah, so a couple of optimizations there. Here's where you configure those things. Second tab of the collection service options dialog. So yeah, just some food for thought. Usually once a week, unless you really have a need to see it more often than that, until we can. And then obviously take notice of these threading options and kind of optimize that to your system. Obviously, you can push it beyond the number of cores if you're willing to, but again, just keep in mind how you're taxing your server if you opt to do that. So next up is the server monitoring schedule. This is the meat and potatoes of the metric collections. So every 6 minutes, we're going to collect or attempt to collect metric data from the servers listed in the tree view over here. So every 6 minutes, I'm pinging SharePoint 2013B and pulling that back all those WMI counters. Every 6 minutes, I'm hitting the SQL server, pulling back all those WMI counters. I can make this any number I want. If there's too much stuff and 6 minutes is too quick, I can make it 15, an hour, whatever the case may be. Or if I want to see stuff more up to the minute, I can even decrease it down to 1 minute. This is totally at your discretion, so just make it how you want it to be. By default, we do 6. Database fragmentation collection schedule. We do collect some fragmentation data. Similar to content summary, fragmentation data collection is a little bit taxing on a SQL server. If you have any other tools that monitor fragmentation collection, they're very likely collecting on an overnight quiet time basis. For instance, if you use Idera's SQL Diagnostic Manager tool, same situation applies, right? So we're doing that stuff during our quiet time. By default, we do it at 1 a.m. and we do it every night. And every night's not bad for this particular job. I mean, it's worth noting. But one thing to note, though, if you're using this tool to this level for SQL metric monitoring, just keep in mind that every time you look in this console at the fragmentation statistics, they're going to be representing 2 a.m. So if at 5 a.m. or 8 a.m. some fragmentation cleanup job was run to decrease fragmentation in your environment, that won't be reflected until the following night. Does that make sense? So again, we're collecting at one time at 2 a.m., and that's the value you're going to see until the next fragmentation collection occurs. But again, this tool, again, in my experience, we have it there. It's a good, nice to have, but whether or not you use this specific tool for that level of SQL monitoring is completely at your discretion. It's just something we have available to you if you need it, right? So moving along to security, we can kind of trim who has access to the collection service, right? So we can restrict particular users, i.e. if user in this list opens the console, he will not be able to make changes that will affect the collection service specifically. So hopefully that makes sense. Pretty simple, straightforward stuff, nothing too fancy. In the repository maintenance section, we've got options in this tab, control the daily maintenance. So this is like grooming essentially, right? So repository maintenance schedule, every day at midnight, we do repository maintenance, and we update the query statistics every 240 minutes by default. So what this job is doing then at midnight is he's grooming any performance data older than 31 days, and he's grooming alerts older than 31 days. So again, pretty straightforward stuff. This is where you set it essentially. Now there are a couple of more options over here. Just got to use the right-hand arrow there. ULS, enable gathering of ULS data for SharePoint databases. This has to be checked, and it is by default in order to get ULS data. And then we can also synchronize a timer job to collect that stuff every so many minutes on a basis, right? This is kind of an advanced feature. If you need to monitor ULS logs, we can do that. It does require that the component analysis solution be installed. That component analysis solution does double duty in this sense. He provides component data for monitor pages. He also gives the access that we need to grab ULS data. So if the component analysis solution has not been deployed, ULS log entries will not be collected. So let that be known. So again, this is a slightly advanced topic. It's there if you need it. It's not always needed, but there it is. And then the last tab just gives us a general overview of the configuration, including the service, the collection service host machine, the version that we're running, the port that we're using, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The location of the repository database, that's a good one. And then the version for that repository SQL server. This is good information from a diagnostic perspective. You can copy it out, email that over to support if needed, et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of in a nutshell is the collection service options. I want to quickly run through some of these other things so that we don't get too far behind on our time. Management console preferences. Obviously, this is pretty negligible. How often we're refreshing the dashboards. Every 2 minutes we do it by default. Yeah, and then, just user experience stuff, right? Maintain selected tab and area when switching between servers. It should be making some sense, right? They show a maximum of so many alerts, et cetera, and yada, yada, yada. So that's pretty straightforward. The other thing I wanted to mention, though, is managing licenses, and specifically I wanted to talk about adding a new server to the farm. So keep in mind that with this server, even though we've added a farm and configured a farm to be monitored, I can totally go in here and add other satellite servers that aren't involved in the farm. For instance, if I go in here and I want to add a server, for instance, I can specify another server I have called SharePoint 2010A. I can click OK, and that server gets added to my nodes list. And what that means is that I'm now getting information against another server that may not be directly involved in the farm, but perhaps it hosts some tools that we're using to manage stuff, or perhaps there's some other reason we need to know status about that server in relation to the farm, or whatever the case may be. At the end of the day, we can add additional servers and we can manage them there. And the point of that I'm getting to is that it will eat a license. So here's where we're allocating what servers our license is applying to. And we can change this, and we talked a little bit about this in the last meeting, but suffice it to say, we can shuffle these up as much as we want. If I have a 5-server license and I have 15 servers, it means I can monitor 5 servers simultaneously. So I can go in here and change what I'm monitoring at any given time. So as we add new servers, this is where we're managing that. By default, they just get automatically ticked, as you've seen here. And now that it's been ticked, if I collect metrics for this server, we should see some alerts come back in just a second after that collection occurs.